What's the difference between a pidgin and a creole? A pidgin is a simplified form of communication that develops between two groups of peoples that don't share a common language. The word pidgin itself is actually a Chinese pronunciation of the word business, and it was used to describe business English, the type of English that was being spoken when American businessmen and Chinese businessmen met to do business. Some examples of pidgin include Eskimo trade jargon, Mobilian jargon, international sign, settler Swahili, and Tinglish, which is Thai English. When children then learn those pidgin languages as a first language, they flesh it out with all the grammatical complexity and full vocabulary that any language has. When that happens, it becomes a creole. Some examples of creole languages are Australian Creole, Gullah in the southeastern US, Haitian Creole, Jamaican patois, Creole in Sierra Leone, Singlish, which is Singapore English, and Tok Pisin in Papua New Guinea. You can see that some of these creoles still have the word pidgin or patois in their name, even though they're now full creoles, because that's what they started as, is as pidgins. But not all creoles start as pidgins. When two languages are in intense contact, they can create a new language which tends to be analytic and morphologically simple. That doesn't mean that creole languages are simpler languages. It just means that they express grammatical concepts through independent words rather than affixes like prefixes and suffixes. So it's a lot like Mandarin. Some linguists even think that English underwent a process of creolization after the Norman conquest, because that's when English lost a lot of its noun suffixes and its complex verb conjugation. It didn't completely creolize and become a creole, obviously, but it underwent a lot of the same processes that would have eventually led to a full creole. And this brings us to one of the hardest parts about studying contact languages, is they tend to exist on a continuum. Especially when one of the languages is much more socially prestigious than the other, you have a situation where speakers learn that prestigious variety to varying degrees of proficiency. And this creates a continuum of how well people can speak that prestige language versus not. The prestige language is called the acrolect, and the low prestige language is called the basilect. And speakers will switch between the acrolect and the basilect depending on the social context they're in or who they're speaking to, or sometimes even mid-sentence depending on what they're saying. Here's an example of 18 different ways that you can say the phrase "I gave him one" in Guyanese English spoken in Guyana. You can see that the further down the continuum you get, the less like English it sounds. Some scholars even think that the dialect of African American vernacular English in the United States might have originated as a Creole and then later become more like Standard English. There's also one other type of contact language that's not a pidgin or a Creole, and that's called a mixed language. And these tend to come about when the speakers of the two contact languages are on similar levels of prestige, and they tend to be very bilingual. So what happens is they systematically mix pieces of the grammar of each of these languages. So for example, you might have a mixed language that uses noun morphology from one language and verb morphology from another. Some examples of this include Michif, which is a mix of French and Cree, Miedni Aleut, which is a mix of Russian and Aleut, or Media Lengua, which is a mix of Quechua and Spanish. I actually did a whole video on mixed languages recently, so I'll link that below. If you want to learn more about the world's languages, give me a follow.